If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Paranormal believers, what made you believe? My husband and I live in a 100-year-old house. It's always been a little creepy, like hearing people talking in another room and going in and there's no one there. But, a couple of years ago we had two really good hauntings that totally convinced me the paranormal is real. The first thing that happened was when I was sleeping on the living room floor in front of the TV because I hurt my back and was trying to get it to unkink. I woke up at 4 a.m. and I heard the mantel clock chime 4. I'm sure I was awake because I watched TV for a few minutes. I heard my husband walk into the room behind me, pick up the comforter and spoon behind me with his arm thrown over my waist. After a couple of minutes it was like his arm weighed a ton. And he was throwing a lot of heat. Just about then I heard my husband start snoring, in the bedroom. I was like, ah shit, freaking terrified. So I counted to 3 and threw the cover off and ran. Woke him up and we looked, there was no one else in the house. I know there was something there though. The second time we were both asleep in the bedroom at about 4 a.m. again. My husband says he woke up to hear two little girls talking. He could hear that they were playing jacks. He could hear the ball bouncing and the metal sound of the jacks on the wood floors. One of the little girls says to the other one, watch this. And she goes, mama, mama. And I sat straight up still asleep and said, what baby? Once a mom, always a mom, right? The little girls laughed because it worked. So he kind of shook me awake and I looked at him then at the doorway where the little girls were. They looked real except their outlines were wavering and they were almost black and white in coloring. They saw us both looking and laughed. Then the older girl grabbed the littler one's hand and they walked right through the bedroom wall and disappeared. I can't say it really fully pushed me over the edge, but it made me, to use a double negative, not believe. I guess I'm agnostic on it. I grew up with a Burmese mountain dog. Anybody that knows them knows they're already calm, gentle giants. Mine never once in his entire life barked or growled at anything. He was calm and stoic. Until one night he wasn't. I was about 15, home alone with the dog, and he just lost his shit. He looked around the room, let loose a growl that absolutely thundered in his chest, and started barking like mad. He had stood up and was in a threatening pose, his hair all straightened out and laid flat. He was ready to go. It was pure, pants-shitting terror for what felt like 1,000 or so years. Then he just stopped. His hair mussed back up and he patted over, dropped his mouth in the big doggy grin, and licked my face. If it was a demon or something, it didn't want up with my dog again. When I was 18 living on my own for the first time, I kept waking up and seeing a woman with matted, black hair sitting on my bed and smiling at me. A creepy smile. Not a nice one. She scared the shit out of me. One night I woke up and she was there and slowly held up her hands and they were fucking grotesque. It looked like third-degree burns covering them. I was talking to my mom and mentioned it and she just said, weird. She hasn't been around since you were a kid. Don't encourage her. She shows up every now and again. Sometimes in nightmares. Sometimes when I wake up at night she's at the foot of the bed being creepy. I've had roommates who have seen her too, without me mentioning it to them ever before. I just ignore her. When I was younger my mom used to invite random neighborhood children over for dinner and parties so they could eat. At my sister's birthday party everyone was outside getting ready to hit the piñata. My father noticed a girl sitting inside staring out the window at us. We have a large window beside front door. He told me to go inside and ask her to come out and join the party. I ran up the walkway, looking at her through the window as I went towards the door, and then as soon as I passed through the doorway, losing sight of her for a few seconds, she was gone. My dad thought she had fallen. There's a couch in front of the window so he thought she fell on the couch. I looked around for her but couldn't find her so I told my dad. He helped me look for her but still nothing. No one else saw her except me and my dad. My mom said she didn't recall inviting any girls with our description of her. We forgot about it until some years later, though I don't really know exactly how many. My dad and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. From my dad's armchair you can see into the kitchen a little bit. Me and my dad were talking about the show we were watching when he suddenly got quiet. He said my name and motioned for me to come over to him. He told me to look at the microwave. I saw that girl's reflection in the microwave, exactly the same as before. I ran into the kitchen and my dad followed, but again no one was there. We were both pretty spooked so we went out for ice cream until my mom came home. I thought it was a neighborhood kid playing a prank on us the first time. But seeing her the second time unchanged in our kitchen many years later made me start believing in ghosts. I have two spooky incidents that happened after my dad died. First time is that my dad passed away while we were out of the country. It was very unexpected. A couple days before he passed, he had issues sending and receiving texts/calls. His phone was always on for business calls/emergencies when we were on vacation/traveling. Several days after we get back home and are planning his funeral with my family. I'm confessing to them that he embarrassed me at dinner, and my last conversation with him was us arguing before he passed and felt horribly guilty. Just as I explained that, I hear my phone go off and see a text from my dad. We had his phone charging in the kitchen, so it was already creeping us out that none of us had touched it for the past few days. I opened the text and it said, "I love you, love Dad." I obviously lost it, and so did my family. My logical mind says that it's just a text he sent while I was testing his phone the week prior that finally went through, but his phone was on and connected for at least 3 days back home, and the text came at that exact moment. A month or so after my dad passed, I was driving to the first family get-together since the funeral, and I was sort of in a funk that this is the first family outing without my dad. As I'm driving through a rural area, I hear my dad's voice yell at me to stop. He taught me to drive, and I was very familiar with his panic yells. I slam on my brakes at an intersection with a green light for me, and an 18-wheeler comes barreling through the intersection. If I didn't stop, I would have definitely been hit. Once again could be grief and thinking about the times my dad taught me how to drive, but still weirds me out to this day. Haven't had any other weird instances since these, and it's been almost 8 years now. I used to live in NC, in a small town no one's ever heard of. I used to think about ghosts all the time, but only for fun. I never considered it any different from Santa or fairies. One night, my mom told me she was sending me to Bible summer camp, and my experiences there were isolating and negative, so I had a breakdown because I really didn't want to go. I didn't know shit of what spirits could or couldn't do, especially back then, and I wasn't one to pray at that age, so I decided to ask any spirit in my house for help, once my parents had left. I called out, "Is anyone here? Can you please help me?" a few times. Before I continue, I need to stress, I have lived in that house for about 10 years by that point. I was an abused kid too, so I taught myself to be very keen to every noise the house makes, naturally or by the people living in it. I knew every creak by heart at that point. If someone was in the house, I would know, and I would know who it was based on their walk. And I knew for sure the difference between normal croaks to walking sounds, the difference between the levels, which door is being opened and closed, etc. So, after a while of calling out for help, I hear something, my parents' door unlocking from upstairs, opening, and swinging shut. A pause. I called out again, thinking my parents might still be home and maybe I made a mistake, which I distinctly remember because if they heard me crying I would have gotten yelled at. "Hello? Is anyone home?" Another pause. Then, I heard footsteps walk along the hall above me tentatively. They were light, like someone who weighed so little and was walking barefoot. Almost the same sound as a cat. My cat was outside, though, and these were distinctly human steps. No one was home. I called out one more time, "Hello?" The walking slowly made its way to the top of the stairs and paused, as if leering down from the top step, something I would often do if there were a stranger in the house or if I was listening in on people downstairs. Then, very slowly, I heard this entity walk all the way down the steps and leisurely walk towards me down the hall. I saw a glimmer of light like a sunbeam catching the edge of a dress beneath the trees, and the footsteps stopped about a yard out in front of me. I nervously tried to explain myself, but I felt a confusion and irritation from this thing. I didn't hear words or see much of anything, so I didn't know how to close the conversation. I just awkwardly walked away to watch TV, but I felt eyes on me that whole night. I think I just woke them up and they were annoyed. Ever since then, I've been a believer, and I've had more unexplainable events happen there too. But, not much after since I've moved out. A few years ago my great-grandmother was in her last few days. My family lives a couple of hours away and I wasn't really able to get there. I had just seen her a couple of weeks before that and had personally made peace with the inevitable. One night I had a dream where my great-grandmother and I had a nice, long conversation in the house that she had lived in when I was a young kid. We talked about her life and experiences, my life, and my future. It was the most vivid and lucid dream I've ever had. The next morning, my mother called with the bad news that my great-grandmother had passed during the night, probably about 11 p.m. I don't know at what time I had that dream, but I definitely didn't go to bed before 11. Personally never experienced anything, but I've heard some pretty strange stories that really can't be explained any other way. For instance, my dad's aunt is the crazy one because she has psychic abilities, for lack of a better word. My dad took my mom to meet her and she asked my mom, "Who's that standing behind you?" And of course my mom thought it was my dad just sorta messing around, But she went on to say, no, it's a woman in a tracksuit. And my mom flipped. When she was a kid, she had a super strong relationship with her grandmother who died of a heart attack, and my mom always talked about her visiting her in her dreams. But when they buried my mom's grandmother, they buried her in a tracksuit, and my mom swears that she's never told anyone else what they buried her in, so there'd be no way for my dad had to unplug it to get it to stop. We replaced the TV, that one did the same thing. After a few months of weird shit happening, I awoke to the feeling of someone sitting at the foot of the bed. I felt the bed compress as though a real person had sat down. I jerked up and looked around and saw nothing, but there was an imprint in our comforter where someone had sat. Several more weeks go by and finally the same thing happened again, only this time there was a man there. Big hat, trench coat, looked like he was straight out of a western. After a few seconds he disappeared. I told my boyfriend about him and his response was, oh good, he finally let you see him. After that it just became normal. He sat at the end of the bed most nights while I was pregnant, and then after the baby was born he must have went in and sat with her. We would still catch glimpses of him here or there, and you'd hear footsteps when home alone. We eventually broke up, and I gotta say I miss the ghost way more than the boyfriend. It was the night after my dad unexpectedly died a few years ago. He always used to make fun of me for watching paranormal shows. I would jokingly tell him that if I ever died, to watch for weird shit to happen because I was going to give him a sign that it's real. I was laying in bed sobbing and trying to process that I had just lost him. I was trying to be quiet because I was laying next to my boyfriend at the time who was sleeping. It was the absolute most painful feeling I've ever felt to this day. All of a sudden, my phone that was on the nightstand started lighting up and beeping. No notifications. Just flashing on and off while making noises. It wasn't plugged in. Just sitting there. After about 2 minutes of it, I was almost in a panic. I'm still not sure why, but it scared me. I said out loud, Dad, if that's you, please stop because I'm freaking out. Then it stopped. Just as quickly as it had started. I know it was him. I've regretted telling him to stop since the second it came out of my mouth. I've never really felt him since. Maybe it was him just letting me know he was there and that all the shit he gave me for believing was worth it. Maybe I was just at a mental breaking point. Who knows? But, I'm glad it happened and I got to experience it. I was on the phone to a friend as we were chatting. I heard his mom in the background saying she came back as she has forgot something and said I love you to him. 2 minutes later he had to hang up the phone as his dad's phone was calling him. His parents had been in a severe car accident on a motorway and his mother had died in the ambulance. He didn't see his mom in the house, but we both heard her. The accident was around 6 miles away. His dad has suffered a broken arm, leg and cuts. The accident had happened 40 minutes before we heard his mom. My grandma plus uncles bought a house together in 2008 because it was unbelievably cheap. Every man who was married or in a relationship who slept in a particular room in the house would wake up from the same nightmare. We later found out a woman who had been raped by her husband's married friends had hung herself there 30 years prior, and the house had been going from owner to owner ever since. They, my family, did a bunch of purification rituals and finally ended up locking that room up for good. And that kept it okay for a while, but 3 years later, my grandma also passed in the same house, so nobody wanted to stay there anymore and they sold it again. For the same unbelievably low price they got it in the first place. I'm an atheist. I don't really believe in the supernatural, or at least not things like crystals affecting your energy or zodiac signs having anything to do with anything. But I have a really had time not believing in ghosts because I saw them as a kid, until I was about 7, and I have some memories of them, and my mom tells some interesting stories of unexplained things that happened. Like the time we were on a road trip and I said there was a ghost kitten in the car and played with it the whole way there, and then when we got there my parents found a dead kitten that had crawled up onto the engine for warmth and died when we left. Or the time we were in a restaurant that was the only building that had withstood a tsunami that had happened about 100 years prior, and I got really nervous and insisted I talk to my mom outside the building, and when we did I said there was a ghost lady talking to me that I didn't like, and then recited a poem she told me about a love lost at sea. The weird thing is that I had a super strong lisp, yet I recited this poem perfectly with the accent of the time and no lisp. Super freaked my mom out, so we left. And I remember what the ghost that lived in my grandma's 90-year-old house looked like, and lots of weird unexplained things happened in that house, though never anything malicious. So for as much as I trust science, I still think there are some things that haven't been discovered yet. I don't know how much I believe in most paranormal things, but when I think about the topic, I can't help but think of the mantis shrimp can see. The human eye can sense red, green, and blue, and with varying combinations of those 3 colors, we get to enjoy millions of colors. The mantis shrimp has 16 different receptors, meaning the mantis shrimp can see in potentially trillions of colors we are physically incapable of even imagining. I believe that it's not just possible, but almost guaranteed, that there's a huge portion of knowledge we're locked out of because we, as a species, simply are lacking whatever specialized organs that would allow us to study and explain. Problem is, try imagining a brand new sense. How do you explain it to others that have never felt it? If you can't feel it, how do you build a machine that translates it into senses you can experience? There's just so much we don't know that we don't know. Current scientific evidence suggests the paranormal doesn't exist, but I'm willing to say there's every chance that we don't know how to interact with that part of the universe yet, and that one day the supernatural skeptics, myself included, may be completely proven wrong. It hasn't been one event, just unrelated small events that have happened for as long as I remember, mostly at my parents' house. My dad used to be a metal detectorist. He had taken me to a site of a medieval plague village and let me run loose as it was an enclosed field. After a while I came running up to him to tell him there was a woman in a dirty long dress and a poorly looking little boy that kept looking at us, and I didn't like it. It was scary. There wasn't anyone there. My bed will randomly start shaking in the night. This happened last week again. Something pulled the duvet off my feet and sat on the end of the bed, then the bed started shaking. I was wide awake. I'd only just got into bed though. Usually, I'll wake up to it. My friend and I were out for a drive on a stormy Halloween night and we saw a roughly human-shaped column of mist standing against the wind in a gateway. I was staying in the room of a recently departed family member on a hot summer night and it just felt wrong. I'd taken all the sheets off the bed because it was so hot, but in the middle of the night, I remember waking up briefly being absolutely freezing cold and shivering, but promptly fell back to sleep. When I woke up, all the sheets, the duvet, and the topper were back on the bed on top of me and very neatly made. When I was missing my grandma on Christmas Eve, I asked her to visit me. At some point in the evening I went downstairs and her collection of bookmarks that I kept wedged between two books on the top shelf were across the floor, and the two that were facing up had an extract of the "Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep" poem, and the other simply said, "I'm fine, thank you." I had a sliding door bolt latch behind me from the inside and locked me out. My dog passed recently and I've once heard his claws on the kitchen floor behind me, heard him come upstairs and in knocking on the door to be let in. We let him in. There's been a few other weird bits and bobs, but these are the most concrete and unexplainable to me. My dad was terminally ill when I was a teen. One night before bed, I went to say goodnight. As I stood in the hallway I thought I saw someone standing by his bed. It was late, and it was just out of the corner of my eye. I assumed it was my mom. Out of nowhere my mom come up behind me, made a soft gasping sound and pushed me into the bathroom and shut the door. I was confused and stayed in there for maybe a minute. When I opened the door, she was standing there in shock. I asked her, what was that for? She said, that was grandfather's nickname, standing over Dad. My grandfather had passed about 2 years before. My dad passed away not too long after. My mom is sure that her dad was there to keep an eye on us at the end of my dad's life. When my family and I moved into our new home, things started to freak us out. We would hear people talking in other rooms and sometimes we would hear footsteps coming from the attic. I told my friends when they visited and they laughed at me. All of a sudden a lamp turned on and then off by itself. It was weird, but we just thought the outlet or the lamp switch is broken. However, when I took a look I found out that the lamp wasn't even plugged in. Another day my mom was in the living room and 3 windows and a couple glass stuff broke simultaneously all of a sudden and she heard voices in another room. My wife rang me at work to tell me my dad, who had died recently, had come to her. They were in a treehouse, which holds significance. Then I nearly fell over when she said it was weird, he looked like he had diamonds in his eyes. A couple of weeks after that I was at a friend's house in the kitchen eating a sandwich with her 12-year-old daughter at the table. She has form when it comes to the paranormal. She started staring behind me when I asked her if she was okay. She looked spaced. She said, "He's sorry." "You know who's sorry?" I said. "The man with the diamonds in his eyes standing behind you." She said, already getting out of her chair. She walked around the table, hugged me and said, "He needs you to know how proud he is of you and how much he loved you." We had spread his ashes in the lake with his mother and father. The diamonds on the lake Pop used to call the sparkling as the rising sun hit the water's surface. "I miss you, old man, every day. Love you, you old bastard." 2 years ago, my granddad died. He died suddenly of a pulmonary embolism on his conservatory floor with my grandma and 2 paramedics beside him. My dad is an only child and he was pretty gutted about his dad dying. My dad went to visit a medium, mainly out of curiosity. This woman had never met or had contact with any of my family. She told Dad that Granddad was beside her, telling her information. She was able to tell my dad, in very high detail, how my granddad died. How he felt while he was dying, how he was feeling when he died, what happened and what was said in the conservatory at the time, etc. The only people who would have known that kind of information was my granddad, grandma, and the paramedics. She also was able to tell Dad details about our family that she couldn't have found anywhere. Dad went home to tell Grandma what the medium said, and my grandma broke down. Everything was 100% accurate. 100%. With no possibility of her researching us beforehand. I know there are people who claim to be able to communicate with the dead, and I know that some of them are scammers, but I absolutely believe that some are very real. I don't know if I'm a believer per se. I tend to be very skeptical about things like this, but something happened to my grandmother years ago and it really made me question the validity of paranormal activity. In the last months of his life, my grandfather had this really old picture of his parents framed and hanging up on a wall in their house. He had become very sick and needed help doing almost everything. He was in no shape to even go to the bathroom on his floor face down in the middle of the night. My grandmother, still devastated at the loss of her husband, likely had her thoughts elsewhere and just chalked it up to coincidence. Finally, on the third night of it happening, she got out of bed and said, "Okay, Jay, I'm moving your picture for you." So she did and hung it up on her bedroom wall where it would be out of the sun, and it was never an issue again. Could it really just be wild coincidence? Maybe, but it certainly made me think twice about it all. Not sure I believe in ghosts, and I think most things can be explained, but here's my story anyways. Growing up, the house next door to us was someone's second home, and when they were gone, which they usually were except in the summer, we'd help take care of the house and keep an eye on it. As the owner's parents got older, they started staying there for weeks at a time, and the owner would come visit on the weekends, so we'd usually check on them every other day or so. The owner's dad settled into a routine. He'd open the garage and sit in a lawn chair all day waving to everyone who went by, and in the evenings he'd lay in bed and watch TV. Unfortunately, a few years ago he passed away. A few months after, though, weird things started to happen. Late at night the TV turns on. The houses are mirrored, so their master has a window right across from my parents' master and they could see the light from the TV. We figure they must have gotten into town late, so in the morning my dad tries to take them some mail, but no one is there, so he calls the owner and the owner confirms no one came up last night and asks us to look inside. Sure enough, TV is off and no one is there. Second night, same thing, TV comes on, so my dad calls the owner, confirms no one should be there and asks us to check it out. We go in and no one is there, so we turn off the TV. Third night, same thing, but this time I check to make sure there's no alarm for the TV set to turn it on, and nothing. This continues until we finally just unplug the TV. After the first night of no TV, we go again to the house to check and make sure they aren't having electrical issues that could have been turning the TV on somehow and might start a fire, and check the electrical panel by the garage, and we see the old lawn chair has been knocked off the shelf. We tell the owner, and all of us just jokingly say it must be his dad who's bored, so we set the chair up by the driveway, and that's where it's been ever since. I was stationed at the Pentagon a couple of years after 9/11. It was after midnight, and I had to go to a new office to get some copies. I came out one of the stairwells in what I thought it was the correct corridor, but due to reconstruction, the signs had been taken down. I wandered the corridor for a few minutes trying to get my bearings. I turned a corner and there was a Marine a little ways from me. I tried to get his attention, but he turned and started walking away. He was wearing the guide uniform for the daytime tours. They usually wear the taps on their shoes so the tourists will pay attention to them. But he didn't make any noise. I tried to walk faster. Running isn't done in the Pentagon, but I couldn't catch up to him. Within half a dozen steps, he had turned a corner, causing me to lose sight of him. I turned the corner also, and there was only floor and plywood walls with a single exposed light bulb. No doors, no way through. I decided I'd had enough of being lost and went back to where I started and found the place I needed on the second try. I was always very skeptical, until I went to work where I work now. I worked 24-hour shifts in a medical center that used to be a full-sized hospital, and during the night you can hear people walking up and down the stairs, tapping on the metal caps on the edge of the steps, and furniture being moved upstairs. Babies have been heard crying, and my closest work colleague has heard a loud thump like a stack of books being dropped, and someone tapping on the window outside. Multiple people in one room will all get cold shivers and feel someone watching. But the thing that really seals the deal is that multiple people, including myself, have caught glimpses of someone walking past the reception desk and had to double take, and every time it's been a tall woman, some think in an old nurse's uniform. I've never felt threatened by them and no one's ever been harmed, so I've become quite used to them now, and sometimes it feels odd when they're having a quiet night. Me and my mom were home alone and heard voices. We were in the living room at the time. She thought she left the TV on in her room at the end of the hall. But we got up to check and it was clearly not on as we approached the room, and then the light whispers turned into a child's laugh which freaked me the fuck out. It was just loud enough to plainly hear. As we approached the room, her closet was open, which was normal, but I asked if it was coming from the closest. As a child you tend to think these things. As soon as I said that, I saw a shadow dart across the closet floor into the corner. We both gasped and she closed the bedroom door, picked me up and began running out of the apartment. The door didn't close all the way and it was slowly opening, and I could just barely see in over her shoulder as she carried me, and there was the silhouette of what was clearly a person, or child, crouched in the corner of the closet. It moved in such a way that it almost looked like an animation, which was weird. It wasn't fast or moved, but it was very weird as I remember it. We moved apartments later that year. I kind of always have, but didn't acknowledge it until this happened to me. In my childhood home, there was old electronics laying around, like those really old big TVs, and every time I was in the room alone the electricity would tick, and my parents always brushed it off because, again, they were old electronics. When I was alone at home I swear I could hear steps, things fell on other rooms without there being a window open, and sometimes the lights would go off without me touching the switch. This all happened throughout my entire childhood. The last day I stayed in the place, I was packing and my parents had gone out to buy food, I believe, when I felt a cold breeze behind me, so I turned around to see if I left the window open, and there was a figure on my doorway. It wasn't threatening or scary, aside from being completely faceless, and it was just standing there. It was about my height and very skinny, and it wasn't moving. I don't know how or why I felt great sadness, like the spirit was feeling sad that I was leaving. Something fell to my feet and I picked it up. When I turned around to see my doorway again, it was gone. I believe that whatever that was attached to my old childhood place, and I don't know how or what, but I sometimes think I feel something similar to what I felt back then, but it's very rarely. I used to work night shift in group homes for the mentally disabled, or severely mentally ill. At one house I worked at, there was constant scratching coming from the walls. I figured it was just squirrels, but now I'm not too sure. We had set a lot of traps and never caught anything. But this isn't what made me a believer. What happened was, one night I was watching TV in the living room after all the residents had fallen asleep. Around 3 a.m. the doorbell starts ringing like someone is frantically pushing it. I get up and go to the door, but when I got there and opened it, nobody was there. Now the 3 things you need to know about the entryway. First is that the entry is into the living room, and I can see it from the couch. Second is that the front door has a very large window on it, 2/3 plus of the door is window, and lastly, that the walkway to the front doorknob, a 20 to 30 feet corridor that has 12 feet brick wall on either side. So in order to ding dong ditch, you'd have to run back that entire length to be able to duck around a corner. I figured I was being pranked by one of our more mischievous residents, so I went and checked on them all, and they were all fast asleep. As soon as I finished shutting the last resident's door, the doorbell started frantically ringing again. I rushed to the door again only to find nobody there. This time I was determined to catch them, so I turned all the lights off except the TV and hid right beside the door so I'd be able to immediately open it when they came back. After 20 minutes the doorbell started going insane again. I jumped out and quickly turned on the walkway lights and looked out the window, but nobody was there. I then opened the door thinking maybe they were hiding to the side of the door like I had. After seeing nobody there, my stomach dropped and I got a feeling of dread. I slowly started closing the door. As soon as the door was almost closed all the way, the doorbell started going nuts again and stayed that way for at least 15 minutes before stopping again. It was almost as if whatever it was took great pleasure in mocking and taunting me. I locked the door and ran my ass to the couch after turning on all the lights I could. Another disturbing thing about this is it seemed to read my mind. Whenever I got the urge to go outside and smoke, it would start with the doorbell again. It's like it didn't want me to forget it's there and a threat. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was a poltergeist. That place was rife with bad energy, as most group homes are. A lot of suffering and raw emotions happen at those places. It also didn't help we had a resident there who had literally gone insane after watching his parents get murdered in front of him, and a medium-low functioning schizophrenic with what I've confirmed of at least 8 distinct people talking to him in his head. Both of these residents are constantly having shit knocked off their shelves/walls in the middle of the night, and it's super common for them to be yelling at people that aren't there to shut up in the middle of the night. I used to think it was just mental illness, but now I'm not too sure. Also, years later I worked in a facility where someone hung themselves in the bathroom. The bathroom door slams shut in the middle of the night if you try to leave it propped open, which is company policy. I used to work for a couple haunted hotel properties in a town where gold was found. It brought all sorts of history to the small town, and all the original buildings were still there. I never believed until then. Certain staff members refused to enter one house alone. I was cleaning the house on my own, waiting for my coworker to arrive. Upon entering one room in particular, I felt, ugh. That was the first time I saw a shadow person. There was also one room that without fail, a guest would check out and say that the closet door opened and slammed shut forcefully. I had to bring extra pillows and blankets to that room prior to the guest showing up. They called me maybe around 8 p.m. to request it. I locked the front desk and went to the property. Wouldn't you know it, the exact thing happened to me as I was leaving the room. Other things include people seeing a woman and a child looking out from the windows. I felt dizzy in the kitchen storage area and absent-mindedly told a maintenance worker. He said, "In the kitchen?" "Yeah. A previous owner's son hung himself in the basement. Ever since we sealed it off, stuff stopped happening, but you'll get dizzy." In a cheery way that made me wonder if he had actually just told me his grandma's banana bread recipe, and I was the crazy one. Oh, one room, anytime a guest left, you'd find the alarm clock in the same spot under the bed without fail. Let's see. Oh, once we locked all the doorstairs rooms and prepared to leave. My coworker forgot something and walked back in. Came back, pale as a ghost, pun intended, saying all the doors were swung open and unlocked, and all the lights that had been turned off were now on. It was also common to turn off all the lights in the house. So many times, we'd be pulling out of the driveway, look back, and everything was turned back on. That particular house was eventually sold to a lady and her kids. She once came in saying her kid was always talking to a doorway and would become fixated on it. I hadn't heard that one, but she understood when I tried to gently let her know our history with it. Another house had a nice little common sitting area downstairs. Still had the original flooring, with scuffs from cowboy boots. Landlord was replacing doorknobs and locks in the room next to our apartment. He left a box of tools there overnight, and around 2 a.m., my husband heard loud banging in that room. He thought someone had broken in and went to go check it out. The box of tools was completely across the room from where the landlord had left it, and everything else was completely in place. One night, my husband and I were watching TV, and my husband and cat look out the window abruptly. My husband starts freaking out, asking me if I saw the misty figure in the window that him and the cat had just seen. I told him I hadn't. The area where we used to live had a lot of homeless people around, so my husband went looking around the perimeter of the house to see if it was a homeless person finding a place to rest for the night or something, but he found nothing. We told our landlord about this, and he told us that one of our mutual friends' dad had committed suicide in the building we lived in. I wanted to bring it up to this friend, but I didn't want to be insensitive. One day, I casually mentioned we had some paranormal activity to my friend, and he laughed and said he was waiting for me to say something. Apparently, he'd had several friends live in the house that experienced activity. He also said his dad loved to play practical jokes, and wasn't surprised at all that he was spooking us. One night around 3 a.m., the ghost was making some noise in the next room. My husband went into the room and said, "Hey, Name, it's pretty late and you're kind of freaking me out. Would you mind keeping it down?" And we never heard from him since. I think I've always believed, as strange things have happened pretty much my whole life, but this made me believe beyond a shadow of a doubt. When I was a teenager, my dad moved into a new house. We knew the people who had previously owned it, and they were actually the ones who built it. They told us there were some odd things happening there, but my dad brushed it off. We moved in and weird stuff began happening immediately. Things being moved around, stuff going missing, doors closing on their own, etc. But one night I was laying in bed with my brother watching a movie and he had fallen asleep. I saw what looked like the shadow of a man in the hallway crawling in on hands and knees. Now my dad often did this to try and scare us, so I wasn't immediately freaked out, but then my dad opened his bedroom door directly across the hall. There was no one in the hallway. I freaked the F out and refused to leave the room. Many more things happened after this, but this was the first time I couldn't chalk it up to something logical.